right, we're rolling. Matthew, thank you so much for jumping on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So I'm here today with Matthew Cohn from Stelray. I'll let you do a brief intro on who you are and what you do. But before that, introduce myself. I'm Phil. I'm a partner at Webisoft. We build custom software, and we started this podcast because we thought we didn't have enough work, and so we wanted to fill our calendar with more meetings. No, it's a marketing led initiative for us, and it's so far it's been great. Meeting tons of interesting people. Just yesterday, I was speaking with a guest that does research on the International Space Station. So I'm really meeting all kinds of different people from different industries. Obviously, industries that we're trying to understand more. Uh, Industries like oil and gas, for instance, manufacturing. Obviously, we're as a software provider, those are industries that we're interested in and we operate in. And so, Matthew, without further ado, if you want to take a couple of minutes, just explain who you are and what your current role is.
Yeah, of course. So my name is Matt. Um, Connecticut native, born and raised. I went to school in Boston for a few years and came back, and I've basically just been working in manufacturing ever since. Um, Injection molding facilities, which I just sort of happened into when I got out of school, and this is basically my third tour of duty, a sort of a similar facility. And here I am in charge of the engineering department and all of the tooling, like the tool room and sort of our tooling supply chain for new programs and that sort of thing.
So, what's your actual title? Is it engineering manager?
Engineering manager. Yep.
So, you have a team under you essentially?
Correct. Yep. Yeah, I got one program manager, a manufacturing engineer, two tool makers, an apprentice, and another guy who does like a tooling maintenance, so like cleanings and that sort of thing, but not really like repairs or modifications, that sort of stuff.
And this was your first role out of school?
No. This is uh this is my third like sort of injection molding facility. So I
Okay,
started off
so
just
yeah, you
doing
have a
project
type.
management. Yeah. And then I got into some tooling stuff, some supply chain sort of things, and then just kind of just kept going from there.
How would you describe a day, like a typical day?
Oh man. All right. So every day starts off with a production meeting, where basically we go through every open order that we have to ship in the next few weeks. And we kind of just go machine by machine, just look at what's on the schedule, what broke, what needs to fix or be fixed, what issues we're having in quality. Did we get any customer complaints? Do we have any internal complaints? Just that sort of stuff. And then that's sort of the operations side. And then there's just new projects that are kind of, in the gestation period in the background. So we'll got to kind of balance like the day to day things and like the longer term projects.
Hmm,
That's pretty much basically almost all manufacturing facilities are going to kind of be like that. It's just the subject matter is going to change.
sure. And how would you describe, talk a little bit about your company, the company you work for, what kind of products do you sell, and what a typical, like, what your clients would look like, essentially?
Yeah. Okay. So we're basically a family-run small manufacturing facility in the Northeast. We celebrated 50 years last year, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, congratulations.
And we are basically, thank you. We are just like a contract manufacturer. So our customers are basically anyone that needs an injection molded part. So that ranges from large medical companies to small local entrepreneur
Hmm.
type of guys. Although we're trying to move away from that a little bit. Um, but basically anything really. I mean, we try to stay away from. We can't do ITAR stuff for defense because our facility is not ITAR registered.
Hmm.
But other than that, I mean, there really aren't many parts that we'll shy away from. We're kind of limited on machine size. That would basically be the biggest limiting factor. So there's a certain point where a part is just too large to fit in one of the machines we have here. We would have to turn the job down for that.
I see. Is that mostly a size, like you don't have the room, or?
No, it's just like so every machine can output a certain amount of tonnage, and because when you're injecting the material into the mold, there's basically a projected area calculation that you would do that determines how much force that injection is going to put on the two platens to
Hmm.
try and split them apart. And so molding machines are basically measured in tonnage. So there's a certain point where a part is too large for the press to actually hold the mold together. So you would need, we have a 618-ton press as our largest machine. So if you needed something that required like 1,000 tons or 1,200 or 2,000, we don't have that size machine. Although that you get to the point where they're like the size of a locomotive or something. So
Yeah.
we wouldn't be able to fit too many of those in our building.
Yeah. You need a bigger building at that point. It's a
Yeah,
whole different
exactly.
business.
Whole different game. Yeah.
What's your biggest pain in the company at the moment?
Oh man, that's an excellent question. Well, it's just been a turbulent year from like a sales and marketing standpoint with all of the
2025 has
yeah,
been, yeah,
yeah,
so far.
basically the global trends in manufacturing, tariffs, all that kind of stuff.
Oh
So
yeah, I
just
heard
sort of
about those.
navigating, yeah, all of these these things that are pretty wild, and customers' reactions to these things. I have
Hmm.
customers are basically on wildly different ends of the spectrum on how they feel about some of these things, and
Hmm.
obviously, it's our job to remain neutral, just deliver good solutions to the customer, but, sort of dealing with their interpretation of and expectations as a result of how they interpret what's going on has been kind of interesting over the last year for sure.
So how do you handle that actually? Is it more of a day to day, like we'll see, and then you eat some of the costs, or you?
Well, yeah, we haven't really eaten any of the costs, to be honest. That's been the goal there. So what we've seen is basically the floor at which point you can afford a tool has gone up.
Sure.
And then everything above that has kind of remained the same. So we did have maybe one or two instances last year where basically they just couldn't really make it work, and so the program didn't move forward. But that hasn't been super common. Most of the time, it's just sort of like we get a lot of inquiries on like how we can avoid the tariffs and that sort of stuff, which is, that's not really our business. Breaking the law is not really what we're here for. So
No, not
we kinda
ideal.
have to break the news to them that unfortunately there really is no way around it. It just is the environment that we're operating in, and that's that.
So a little maybe moving towards like more dynamic pricing or.
No, not really. No, I mean we'll have to recost jobs eventually, like because like material prices might increase and that sort of
Hmm.
thing. But whatever
Yeah.
we quote a job to at the beginning, we stick with.
Hmm. Yeah, fair enough.
Give me a purchase order for something, I tell you that it's going to cost X. I'm not going to say that it's all of a sudden X plus five, like before we get to our first production run.
Yeah, just because it's a Tuesday and then the world looks different that day.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
um, what innovation are you most excited about in manufacturing?
Oh man. That's a good question. We're not really all the innovation that you could bring into your facility is driven by what your customers are willing to pay for. You have to be
Sure.
able to justify the expenditure for the new shiny object. So,
Hmm.
unfortunately, most of the time there really just isn't a lot of extra money for that kind of thing. So big automation projects and that sort of stuff is just has not really been in the cards for us too much. So uh, basically, I'm struggling to be honest with you to think of something that is like overly innovative. That would be considered like a new sort of thing. We're basically just operating the way that we have. We've made some improvements to the building. We've gotten some new inspection equipment. We've purchased some, basic robotics for some of our machines, but, we don't have like any kind of cells or anything that are set up. We do a lot of smaller runs, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60,000 pieces, which is kind of like our niche.
Hmm.
When we're changing things over so frequently, it's kind of difficult to like fully automate something to only take it down like a couple of days later when you're going to
Sure.
run something
Yeah.
else. Yeah.
So those are kind of like unique, like a custom order that basically once it's done, you don't really reuse.
Yeah, basically. I mean, we try to, if we can, like, we try to run an annual quantity at like basically at one time,
Hmm.
as if the warehousing isn't too difficult. But we might do like two runs in a year or that sort of thing. So if you're going to make 20,000 pieces, it might only take you like 3 days. And then we take the tool out of the press and put another one in. It's just basically each tool makes a different part. We get orders for different parts. You have to make sure we have the material, any other pieces of the puzzle that kind of go into producing that particular product, and then we kind of run it for as long as necessary, and then we change the machine over to something else. So,
Hmm.
yeah, I've worked at other places in the past where we had basically jobs that were kind of like a lights out, like 24/7, 365 sort of thing, where it's just like you're making as many of them as you possibly can indefinitely.
Yeah.
Those present better opportunities for
Automation. Yeah.
fully automating stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Problem with automating things is that, as a general rule, none of the guys that are in that business can ever give you like an actual deadline for much of anything. They're like, well, we're just going to sort of figure it out. So just, keep giving us the check every month and we'll keep working on it. But
Working on it being the automation part.
yeah, like, oh, I'm going to develop, I'll build this and, oh, it didn't work this month. Let me try this other thing. It can just become like, seriously, like these just endless projects. But,
Interesting.
yeah.
So what? So that's basically like a third party vendor essentially. In that
Yeah,
case,
exactly. Yeah.
right? And so and they would specialize in like manufacturing automation.
Yeah, they're exactly. There are
Okay,
businesses where their whole business is just automation, like they'll
right.
come in.
But it's more like a consultant you're saying where the yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
absolutely. And, if, and I'm not saying that I know they mean well, it's just that the challenges, I think people underestimate the challenges in actually automating something in a manufacturing environment.
Yeah.
Like the biggest opportunity really would be like packaging. So the part is coming off the
Mm.
machines, rolling down a conveyor belt, and it needs to be placed into a box, right? Which seems like it could be the most basic. Like there's a part, it's being presented in the same location every time. You're gonna get like a cobot or some similar type of robotic device to just basically lift that part up and put it in a box, right? But frequently the boxes have to be lined with like a polyurethane bag.
Mm.
And because that basically means that the edge of the box is kind of variable.
Hmm.
Like the robotics, they just don't like that. It's not easy
No.
to get it to kind of place that thing in the same spot in that box every time,
Yeah.
you know?
Not yet. Maybe in
Not yet.
maybe in 2 months.
Well, yeah, I know the way things are going, possibly. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's tough to predict, when it will get to that level of, let's say, dexterity, right, or precision.
Yeah.
It will get there eventually. I'm a
Yeah.
firm believer of like anything a human can do, eventually a machine could do.
Yeah.
But it's how we get there and how long it takes. And so for now, like, so automation's not super useful in your case. What about software? What kind of software do you use internally?
We have like a couple different CAD programs. Like we use like Mastercam in the tool room. We use SolidWorks for basically like reviewing mold designs, making changes to mold designs, that sort of thing. We have like an ERP software called DBA that we use to like run the
Hmm.
facility.
Yeah.
Um, that just sort of does all of our like run scheduling, supply chain management, materials, that sort of stuff. And then we use Excel for a lot of stuff. Still, just the classic.
Spreadsheets, the
Yep,
classic
spreadsheet.
spreadsheets.
That's exactly right. Yeah, a
Yeah,
little bit of Microsoft Project in there every once in a while when something gets really unwieldy. You know.
sure. What about AI, like LLMs or ChatGPTs and the likes? Did you use those for anything at the moment?
We use them for like job descriptions,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
maybe like training plans, social media post first drafts, that kind of stuff. But we have not really found a way to make it useful, like in a day to day operation.
Yeah, at
Yeah,
scale. Yeah, so a little bit here and there, like mostly assistant stuff.
basically, exactly.
Yeah.
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 Manufacturing is just sort of like, I feel like not necessarily that it's not the focus, but it's just this like black hole. I think that we're trying to do our thing like over here, and then there's just all this other stuff is happening.
So you mean it's going to be a little slower to adapt, you mean?
I think so for sure. Yeah. And it's going to be a function of adoption. There's a lot of skepticism, I would say maybe more so than there is in like other industries, but also like
Towards new technology, you mean?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Okay.
But then there's also people who are developing these products are not really working in manufacturing either. Like I have a friend who's a software engineer and he uses it constantly, which would probably make sense because it's kind of like a tool built by software engineers. So if you're looking around, you're like, how am I going to make this useful? It seems to me that it would be only natural that it would be more useful in that world sort of first,
Yeah.
before it kind of makes its way into our world. I guess I could probably see it making a difference in like process development at some point. Like I could theorize there's going to be a time where you put a mold into a molding machine and maybe input like a CAD model and it can deduce a bunch of information like the
Hmm.
volume of the part, like what's the maximum wall thickness, like that sort of thing, and then maybe kind of like get you to a molding process like pretty quickly. But I mean, the only time that we really have to develop a molding process is when a new tool comes in, which doesn't happen every day. We have like a guy who's like his role is that he's dedicated to basically as a process engineer, he's responsible for developing the processes. So, there might be a point in time where like there's tools that make some of those things easier. But I don't know. I guess because I thought about this a lot because I would admit that I'm probably the guy out of my immediate community, my group of friends here that probably uses it the least. And
Really?
I every day on how I can find more ways to use it, and I just have not really found it to be that useful for me, to be totally honest with you. A lot of what I do, believe it or not, is basically communicating with tool builders in China. And I make little graphics that describe what I'm looking for like tooling changes and that sort of stuff. We do a lot of tooling overseas. We do tooling both domestically and overseas. Really, it's just a function of customer requirements, budget, that sort of thing. So just trying to convey my ideas. I mean, I guess I could use Sora for this sort of stuff, but you're trying to work off of like your, direct CAD models and that sort of thing. I just haven't really found it to be any faster.
Well, that's the thing, right? Like if it's not faster, then it's not really worth it. I guess it could help on the translation side, if you're discussing with China and depending if there's a language barrier or not.
Yes, for sure. Definitely.
The drawings, I mean, if it's for specs and stuff, like eventually AI could probably, like it really depends. Like I think AI is useful. It's as useful as you kind of train it to be, right? Like it's really the help with your day-to-day work. You need to get specific, right? You can't really expect like a generic chat GPT to have relevant, outputs to your business. Like you kind of have to really train it in a way that it will know what you know, and then it becomes useful. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
so that's obviously we do a lot of AI integration at Webisoft, and AI development with enterprise and our clients. And so that's mostly what they're interested in is, hey, let's train AI on all our data, and then we can query it and ask it to replace Matthew on some of those exchanges with the Chinese counterparts, right? And
Mhm.
eventually that's something you probably will be able to do, is you'll have kind of a Matthew agent, right? That will
Yeah.
basically be a mini you, or,
Hmm.
someone from your team, essentially, right? Like will absorb all that knowledge and then make intelligent outputs.
Yeah, that would be, listen, if I had like a digital version of me that I could provide to my customers to help them with like their part designs and that sort of thing, and it's just like just come to the real version like once the part is like really ready to go, that would be incredible. I would love that. That would be great.
It's gonna be possible eventually. Personally, I'm looking to have a mini me to answer when my wife texts. That's
I'll I'll just keep that between the two of us there. Yeah, I
yeah.
won't share it
I
out
don't know
there.
how
That's
much
fun.
she listens to the podcast. I guess we'll find out.
Yeah, you got
But
it. That's right.
yeah, I think kind of delegating uh, the repeatable, like day-to-day tasks is definitely what I'm looking forward to with
Yeah.
AI agents in particular. But there's a ton of potential. So it's so interesting to hear you talk about, how you think kind of manufacturing is slow to adapt, because I'm meeting people from other industries like oil and gas, for instance, and they say the same thing. So if everybody says the same thing, that they're slow to adapt, I guess it's everybody, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough, right? Because it's like it's just hard to tell whether like are we slow to adapt for just like cultural reasons or something, right? Like is it
Yeah.
really just that we're just not interested, you know?
Yeah. Or it's
Or
just not
is
worth
it
it,
also
right? Like
just
if it's
that the
not broken.
tools that yeah, the tools are just not like but you made a very interesting point a few minutes ago, right? Where you basically were bringing up the training.
Hmm.
And like I was thinking for a second, like if a customer brings me like a part design, because this is a lot of what we do too, is we have to help these customers get there. There's just certain things that you have to take into consideration, certain draft angles, wall thickness, surface finish, right? Like even something like a texture, they have depth to them, right? So as like a wall gets kind of more vertical,
Mm.
the part might not be able to come out of the cavity, for example, right? So there's so many considerations on the part design. And it would be great if there was like a tool that could kind of like, use AI to just analyze like that design and provide you with that feedback, right? But it's like, how are you going to train that model on that subject matter?
Mm.
There's just probably not, almost all of this feedback is going to be kind of like these are, internal discussions, emails, meetings and stuff between independent businesses and their customers, which is, proprietary information. There's a lot of NDAs and that sort of stuff that
Yeah.
goes on there. So, how are you going to get yourself tens of thousands of basically like, part DFMs, we call them, right? Design for manufacturing, to basically educate like a model on, what is just a lot of like very kind of privately stored proprietary information. It's just there aren't like internet forums, for example, where there's just hundreds of these things that
Yeah.
you
It's
could
not public. Yeah.
easily point like an AI to, you know what I'm saying? And
Yeah.
so that would be the interesting. The kids, although I'm impressed, I'm already feeling old, man, which is incredible because I'm really not that old. I'm only 34 years old. And one of the apprentice told me the other day that she thought that flash drives were just so over, which they are obviously. But it's just incredible how fast things move. So,
Yeah.
someone will probably get there eventually. But I think that, manufacturing is we are trying to be innovative. I mean, we don't have a choice at this point. Basically, I would say in 2026, if you're talking to anybody who is in manufacturing and the lights are on in the United States, you had to have been doing something correctly for over the last like 20, 30,
Right.
40 years,
Hmm.
because
It's
um
rough.
it's yeah, which like for example, the tariffs, right?
Yeah.
If let's say that you're a small tool shop, like I work with some vendors, this is where I frequently hear from the guys that actually build the tools. They have a small facility with some really expensive equipment. They got like 4 or 5 guys, and they build like 20 tools a year for basically really high end like domestic clients, like defense industry, medical stuff, that sort of thing. Well, if all of a sudden your competitors' tools are more expensive, right? Like there's tariffs that are applied to like overseas tooling and that sort of thing. Your stuff might be more attractive, but you didn't keep the lights on by going out and hiring 3 more guys and spending like $5 million on more machines like every time that the wind blew in like a positive direction, So basically what their response is like, well, I'm just going to charge more money for like the same 20 tools that I built this year. And that's like very common kind of
Mm.
reaction to like what's happening. Um, because you can't, those the equipment is capital is it's very expensive for this stuff.
Yeah.
It's not like one of the things that's so amazing about software is that the possibilities are endless with basically just a single computer, like a single tool that you have.
Yeah.
To really expand. I
We
mean, I
have it
know that's
easy
not
compared to you guys, for sure.
a little bit easier, like if we want to get into something new, I have to go buy
You have
like a
to buy a new
multi-hundred
warehouse.
thousand dollar
Yeah.
warehouse or something. I mean, we've had challenges even just getting like one larger press, right?
Hmm.
Now we needed like better cranes to lift the tools because they're heavier than ever before. We needed a larger splitting table because now the tools are big enough that they don't fit on the one that we had beforehand.
Yeah.
Just that sort of stuff. So there's even just downstream effects of like trying to get into something new. But we you have to stay lean. Like Basically, that's another way that you kind of keep it moving. So we're doing well. We're growing a lot, which is great. But we were even like kind of even growing before like last year. So it's really hard to say like what the difference is. But I think after COVID, there was a big push to like maybe reshore some things
Sure.
like the
Yeah.
the that like I read somewhere one time that like Tim Cook got it to the point where like an Apple MacBook only spends like some fraction of a day at an Apple store before it's sold. Like they could predict or had
Hmm.
data that was good, and their warehousing was so lean, so nimble that like it's like everything that was showing up at a store was like gone that day. And that works great until there's like some giant supply chain shock. So I
Yeah.
think that we
Until
start to see some.
nobody goes out anymore, out of their house anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And just
Yeah.
wants like
Well, you can't really predict for disasters, right? Or
no,
pandemics.
of course.
You can't really take that into account.
No, but we have to have contingency plans.
Sure.
It's not great where entire nations are just like kind of be lacking some basic stuff because we're just so used to being able to access it easily.
If you had like a magic wand, right, and you could change one thing about manufacturing, one thing that annoys you, maybe a
Yeah.
kind of a legacy, process that you're stuck having to use, maybe spreadsheets, or everybody's using spreadsheets, so I have to use Excel, or what would it be?
Oh man, this is an easy one. The engineers of the world need more hands-on experience, like 100%. That is a huge problem. And the 3D printer. The 3D printer is the bane of our existence because the 3D printer, I'm telling you, you can make anything on a 3D printer.
Right?
You can make any
It,
geometry you want, and
yeah.
there is no way that that part is going to ever come out of a tool. So we spend a great deal of time working through like completely unworkable part designs
Oh, I see.
that 20 years ago nobody ever you would have looked at it and gone, oh, that's impossible.
Okay, so
But
they
now
come
because
out
of
and say, I
engineering,
want this, and then you have to figure out, okay.
yeah, and it just seems like the old guys, right? They get a bad rap, today some in some ways, but they just had a more kind of practical and realistic experience than I think the latest generation. And I went through this too. Like I went to engineering school and we built almost nothing. We spent almost no time in like a manufacturing style environment. We have like labs, but they weren't like
Okay, I see what you
it's
mean by hands-on. That's what you mean, right? Yeah, it's
yeah,
more theory.
everything
They need more practice. Hmm.
100%, and it's just like the older generation, a lot of engineers started doing something else, which is not really the case anymore. It's hard to get a job in engineering without like a degree, right? Whereas
Hmm.
some of the greatest engineers I've ever worked with were just like tool and die makers for like 20 years before they got into it, or they just came up through an apprenticeship or some alternative avenue into the field. And there's just something to be said for that kind of realistic experience. I'll give you a perfect example. There was one time where I got like a measurement report back. It's like my first job. And I saw that there was a dimension and it was like 2/10,000ths of an inch out of spec. And my customer was asking me if we can make that adjustment. And so I was like 22. I'm like, sure, okay, let me go ask the tool maker. So I brought it to the guy and I said, hey, here's this report. Like, this wall needs to move in like 2/10,000ths of an inch. And he just laughed at me. I swear, he picked up a piece of steel. Like, I was just some random part off the bench. He had a micrometer in his hand and he measured it. And then he just rubbed it between his palms for like 30 seconds. And he measured it again and it was like 3/10ths bigger. And I just remember feeling in that moment, I was like, "Oh my god!" Like I this guy must just think I'm such a dope, right? Coming here asking him to do something that is going to change like every time that the furnace comes on,
Yeah,
right? It's
gravity
like,
changes, or yeah,
yeah, well, and I just had no idea what I was doing,
on the
you know.
weather. Yeah,
And but you're never gonna learn. You don't really like learn that in school. I mean, you learn the theory behind obviously why metal expands in
yeah,
higher temperature, something. But you're just not. It's not applied. Like it doesn't. You don't have that muscle to just realize how impossible that is going to be for somebody to do.
yeah.
But then see, the customer still just thinks that you can move that wall like 2/10. So they have the
They
same
don't know
problem.
what they don't know, right?
Exactly. And the more that manufacturing has become like a kind of muscle that we have not been exercising in this country for a while, like the less this is common knowledge and the more
Yeah.
specialized certain things become that were routine maybe like 20, 30 years ago. So
Yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
these also, on the positive side, they present opportunities to teach your customers things. They present opportunities to build those relationships, and we've found that still the best way to run your business, grow your business is just those relationships we have with our customers. I think that's very common in manufacturing,
Yeah,
to be honest.
totally. And it's the same thing, by the way, in software, right? Clients ask for the sometimes the most ridiculous things, but then they don't know, right? They assume things are easy, or they assume something can be done, and then it's no fault of their own. They just so it's more of an education thing. But you're absolutely right that, and for us as well, I think the primary focus has always been like, what's been your real world experience? Like, what have you shipped, right? What have you worked on? Like, how much do you know about the real world versus, well, what you've learned in school? Because and especially in software, and then depending on the school, right? Some schools are better than others at adapting their programs to be a little more, uh, to have more applications in the real world. But yeah, some people come out of school and have no idea, right? They have like,
Yeah.
they know the theory and how things should work in theory, and but then like they hit a bit of a wall, and so I assume it's the same. Matthew, final question for you. Um, what keeps you up at night about the next couple of years? Like, is there a big problem that you need to solve for your business to keep growing?
No, I would say not. I don't like really, there's nothing on the horizon that seems like it's going to be like an existential threat to our business or anything like that. I mean, like I said, we just celebrated 50 years last year. So, basically what we've been doing has been working. So we're going to kind of continue to do that. And
Mm-hmm.
we're implementing some things to try and, get some better customers and that sort of thing. But I would say, I guess, just the one thing that does keep me up at night in general is just like this the state of manufacturing. Like we really need to improve our performance and like what used to be such a classic like American
Mm-hmm.
skill set that we used to excel at this stuff. I think we still do. It's just like there it would be great if there was like a little bit more investment somehow. We're competing with nations that just subsidize the ever living, what
Mm-hmm.
out of like
And one that
their
starts with C,
industries.
perhaps. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Like, listen, those guys, they get as another bad rap. They get a bad rap, and they really don't deserve it in some ways. I wish people were more willing to acknowledge just how great they have gotten at this stuff,
Yeah.
instead of writing it off as like cheaters or
Yeah.
low quality or because they are incredible, and we share so much in common with them. Believe it or not, just our approach, like just a willingness to just roll with it. Oh, like that doesn't work. Like, okay, throw it out. Let's try something
Yeah.
else.
Try something
I mean,
else.
that like kind of like, we're not really like, the one thing that stays consistent in America is like, we want to make it happen. We want to make as much money as possible.
Yeah.
And they're doing
Yeah.
the same thing.
Yeah.
And if whatever they're doing is not working, they'll throw it out. There's no tradition. There's none of that stuff. It's just how are we going to do it? And they're doing an absolutely incredible job over there. And I think that it would behoove us to not only recognize that, but honestly try and like learn some stuff from those guys at this point,
Yeah.
because the more that we stop or just ignore that, I think that's going to hurt us in the long run.
Yeah. More international collaboration, basically. I mean, just judging by the electric cars that are coming out of China that you kind of see now, and more, they're getting some hype. Yeah, they look like they know what they're doing.
Yeah, they're doing a great job, and you could basically prototype anything. I mean, anything that you could possibly imagine, you could buy over there.
Mm.
So
Give me
if you're
ideas.
developing something and you need, yeah, like it's like you can get anything like you need. And it used to be like that here too. So it would just be good to see somehow it come back a little bit. But the typical prescriptions for how we're going to do that just do not seem to work out.
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah. It's tougher culturally. It's not as sexy, let's say, right? And you'd have to throw a bunch of money at it, a bunch of benefits, and then get encourage young people to get into that space, right?
Yeah,
So it needs a kind of
absolutely.
a mindset shift a little bit. Well, we'll see what happens. I
We
mean,
we still do an incredible job in the defense industry, right? And it's like, what's the difference? The difference is basically just that the money is there,
the
you know?
money's there, yeah.
Yeah, like it's if we can obviously do this stuff here, but it's like the investment has to come first, right? It's like what's
Yeah.
going to happen? Is it the chicken or the egg, right? Are we going to build all the facilities and then get everything to come here, right? Which is kind of like the TSMC sort of approach in Arizona with the semiconductors and that sort of stuff, which,
Yep.
we can do it when it's a matter of like national security. It's just like if we can take that same approach and just extend it to just manufacturing more generally, I think that we would see some more success there because obviously we've proven that we can still do it. I mean, we still build incredible things in this country.
Yep.
They're just not as numerous as maybe they have been in the past, but
Yep.
it feels good to make things every day, though. I will say that's probably my favorite part of what we're doing here is just like the tangible, physical thing that I can hold in my hand and just, look at it as like kind of a trophy at the end of what was like maybe a year and a half long project or something is
Right. So
always a
you
nice
see,
feeling.
yeah, 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 from end to start to finish. Yeah. Yeah. In our case, it's sometimes a little more. It's not as tactile, right?
Yeah, yeah, but watching it happen and stuff and seeing it work, it's still the same thing. You're still building something, So
Oh yeah, but
there's a
sometimes
lot
it's
of
like like a back end module that no one sees, right? Or like integrations, or sometimes it's a little more
yeah, yeah,
abstract than like an actual like front end, mobile app type where like you
yeah,
obviously see the end result and you can play with it.
yeah, exactly.
Matt, thank you so much for your time today. This was great.
Yeah, Phil, thank you so much, man. It's been a great experience, great first podcast. Really appreciate you guys reaching out to me.
First of many, I'm sure. It's the new thing now.
Maybe,
Everybody
yeah,
has
maybe
podcasts.
I could just go into
Now
podcasting
you're
like
gonna start,
everybody else.
a whole streak. I can see it. Thanks so much.